the originals, episode 2, House of the Rising Sun. This episode I thought was absolutely amazing. It gave us a lot of great details. It had, just twists and turns here and there. And it was just an amazing episode, just overall. Like every scene, or just every big point was actually just huge stuff. And it was all crammed into, one amazing episode. And last week's episode, the pilot was really well done. I mentioned in my review, but it was mostly for fans who didn't watch the Vampire Diaries, but somehow got into the original. So for fans like me and a lot of you out there, it was sort of the other half, which I said in my review, is the other half of that episode from the Vampire Diaries, and it was mostly Elijah's point of view. And at the end of that episode, Elijah was daggered and put in a coffin, of course. And in this episode, we find out Klaus gave Elijah to Marcel, and Rebecca goes to find him, and I thought it was amazing how she and Haley ended up connecting at the end of the episode. And of course they connect because Haley's trying to abort the baby, which I thought was like a crazy thing. It was like, wow, they like have abortion in this episode. It was like a supernatural take on abortion. It was really interesting. And that's just other abortion talk and stuff like that. But just for the show in general, it's like she's going through this stuff, and she's trapped in New Orleans. She can't leave because she's connected to the witch. I can't think of her first name, but Devereaux. And so she can't leave or she'll die. So she's trying to get rid of the baby so that she can be free of the whole supernatural mess, aside from of course being a werewolf. And the vampires come in because the witch that she goes to is actually working with Marcel, or at least she tries. I don't know. She was helping somebody out. She says like you want to get points. So whoever she told, I think that might actually come back in later episodes. And she's also in. She was in the preview for next week's episode, so she's gonna have a fairly big role because obviously she's one of the witches who decided, I'm gonna pretty much be on Marcel's side, and maybe that's so that she can try to be in his favor, so she can actually do magic again. Because it just makes sense that someone, regardless of what the cost is, they want to do magic just so that they can be who they are. So it makes sense that there would be a witch character like that, and it'll probably be her, and there might even be more witches like that. But she's working with Marcel, and so he finds out, and he sends his goons out, his night walkers, and when Haley's there by herself, she has to defend the baby, and then of course Rebecca comes to defend her, and kills off even more vampires, including the 6 that she killed in the beginning of the episode. And they kind of bond over that moment, and then they have the talk about Klaus not letting anyone near Rebecca. And what I really loved was then the what they showed, and how Marcel ended up becoming a vampire because he was forced to choose between living out the rest of his life with Rebecca, or living the rest of his life out as a vampire without Rebecca. And it was amazing. Like, it was kind of funny too when Klaus stabbed her. I was like, oh, he's just gonna like end up stabbing someone at the end of like every episode. It's insane. But I thought that was like, once again, I was like, you gotta be kidding. Like, he stabbed her. And I thought it was gonna be really simple and nice. She was gonna say, you can't kill him. You raised him, and he was, it was gonna say, you're right. And then I thought he was gonna like kill him and then kind of freak her out for like a minute or two, and then say, but I can turn him, and then she'd be happy. But he'd probably tell her like, you can't be with him now, or something like that. But the way he did it was obviously a lot smarter than what I had in my head. And he stabbed her and daggered her for 52 years. And he gave Marcel a choice, and Marcel chose to become a vampire. And I love how they actually set that scene up when she gets knocked out by Davina, which of course I'll get to. But she has that memory, and they show the room and stuff, and then she wakes up in that room. And I thought, like, she's in the same room, like, why is it the same room? And it's because he has their house. And I didn't even pay that any attention until that one scene, because I didn't realize he was in their house the whole time. Like in the opening scene when they're at like, I thought they were like at a club or something where just tourists were hanging out, but it was actually, you know, uh, Klaus's, and his family's old house. It wasn't just a random place. So that's why they had like the giant insignia and stuff. And of course, I completely missed out on that during the whole, like all the flashbacks they had when they were training and stuff. But, like all the flashbacks were really good. The first one when Klaus killed her boyfriend, I thought that was a crazy scene too, because he freaked out. And naturally, I thought, oh, he's just gonna choke him and then say, like, don't like ever come near my sister again or whatever. But he chokes him and then just like tosses him over the thing, and all he was about to say was like, show your sister respect. And he like choked the guy out and tossed him over a balcony, and he's dead now. And I just thought like that's insane. Like he went way over the top, like at the drop of a hat. And it was just an interesting scene. And then they show how they met Marcel or Marcellus, and how he got the name Marcellus, and why he got the name. So that was really cool too. Even though it was a small little thing, it was just random stuff I had no idea about. Didn't know the name Marcellus came from Mars, but I thought that was just a cool little scene, and that's why Klaus gave him that name. And the fact that he didn't have one, the reason he didn't, I thought was really interesting too. Was his mom wouldn't name him wouldn't name him until he was 10, because he might have, he might get the plague and die, and she ended up dying, so he didn't have a name. I just thought that was just an interesting thing. It's the times, obviously he was being whipped, so you can imagine what time period that was in. So there, diseases run rampant and things like that. And it was just an interesting line to me that just sort of gave a piece of the time. You just, your mom wouldn't name you because it would hurt her more to see you die with a name than without one. So I just thought that was a really cool thing that they put into the episode, even though it didn't like add anything particular to the story. It was just a really good line to me personally, that was why he didn't have a name. And that's why Klaus was actually able to name him himself. And so then they go through time. Marcel trains with Rebecca, and then of course advances time when he's older, and of course they're connected. And Klaus won't let Marcel near Rebecca. And then of course when Marcel does it anyway, he daggers Rebecca, and that's when Marcel gets that choice. So we see in this episode, during the present, they are still, or at least Rebecca is still connected to Marcel. Marcel's, I think he's like off on his own, because of course he's trying to date the new woman who was at like the club, or not at the club, but she was at like the bar or whatever studying. And so, knowing this, Klaus has his own plans in the background where, he tries to get information out of her, and then he tries to get information out of the new vampire that came in. And even that was a great scene, because I feel like it was done just so Marcel could say that specific line where he says, I have a thing about people betraying their friends. And of course when he says it, he looks right back at Klaus when he says it. But I thought that was just a great scene. And the woman's like cussing the guy, or she's like calling him a nerd or something like that. And he just like snaps her neck, and he lets the new guy in. And in the end of the episode, when Klaus explains all this stuff, like I can't control any of his vampires, because the day I came back, he had them drinking. It wasn't vervain, it was something specific. It wasn't just vervain, but he had them start drinking that so that they couldn't be taken over. So he had to kill these two random people, since he got that opportunity from Rebecca. And it just showed all these cool dynamics where he's not just being like the cool villain anymore. He's kind of like the cool anti-hero, like super anti-hero at this point. All the stuff he does, because like no one's good in the show outside of like Elijah, really. And I'd say Rebecca, and then Haley's like just neutral, because she's kind of just randomly trapped in the middle. But Elijah's probably the only actual good person. He just really wants Haley to have this baby so that Klaus can have a family. And my favorite scene in the whole episode was when Klaus kind of snapped, and he was choking Haley, and Rebecca pushes him back, and you see he's like tearing up and stuff. I thought that was an amazing scene, and she says, it's okay to care because he does care for the baby as much as he said, he hates it and he wishes she was dead anyway or he'd do it himself. As soon as Haley does, takes that choice away from him, he cares because he could have lost a child. So I thought that was an amazing scene, and just the whole episode itself wrapped up perfectly where we get to see Davina use her powers, and after Rebecca, um, basically confronts Marcel after learning that Klaus gave Elijah to him. When she confronts him and she threatens to kill the woman, he says, "All right, I'll show you where he is." And so they go see Davina, and she's obviously an insanely powerful witch. She's so powerful she ended up wiping Rebecca's memory. So when she goes to see her, and she's about to pull the dagger out, and Davina uses her powers to basically put the dagger back in. They have their little talk, and she tosses her out the window, wipes her memory, and that's how they get Rebecca on board to work with Klaus. And one of my favorite lines, when they're talking, when she says like, hey, he has a witch that's so powerful, she could wipe my memory. He says, like I believe Klaus says, like he has, our house, and I want it back. And then Rebecca says, a house is absolutely useless, or it means nothing without family. And Klaus kind of paused for a second, and I thought that was an amazing line from Rebecca. Like everything, like every emotional moment they had was very emotional and very well acted in this episode. And then just so many things that they added. And of course, at the end, Marcel's talking to Davina, and now we see his plan is to find out, how do you kill an original? And I can't imagine that this won't tie into the Vampire Diaries somehow, because that's just going to be a big deal. These shows will have crossovers because obviously, the characters are from the Vampire Diaries. So it'll be cool to see how that does end up crossing over with the Vampire Diaries in its, current season. But at this point in time, with it not skipping those 3 months that we saw in the Vampire Diaries, it won't have a crossover anytime soon. And if it does, it won't be anything huge, because otherwise, that would have been mentioned in like the first episode of the Vampire Diaries. Or maybe not, because they wouldn't want to spoil, of course, the whole season and certain elements. But it'll be cool to see how that affects the Vampire Diaries, just because the shows are so connected. But for this show, the originals on its own, I cannot wait to see how they play things out, and just like how they find Davina. It's going to be cool to see how they find her and who they use to find her, because they can't exactly use other witches, so they'll have to find some pretty special means to discover where Elijah's body is and how they stop Davina, if they even can. But comment below, let me know your like most exciting part from this episode, because I feel like there were so many elements in this episode, and I feel like they did it because episode 1 was really a huge recap for Vampire Diaries fans, or TVD fans. I don't actually say that though. But for this episode, it was its first own episode, I guess. So let me know, what was your favorite moment from this episode, and where do you think things are gonna go now that Klaus and Rebecca are actually on the same team now, and they will of course be throughout this entire series, because that's kind of the point. So how are things going to go now that Klaus actually has a partner in crime? Thanks for watching.